Lowest man on the totem pole. That's how my boss described it. That's how I got stuck on the night shift. That made me the new guy, or TFNG, as my coworker said during the first 2 weeks of my shift training I got at the start of the job. I'm a junior network administrator right out of college, writing on a friend of a friend's recommendation. I was responsible for making sure everything stayed the same overnight. All the little red lights stayed red, and all the green lights stayed green. I had very little idea what I was doing. But in government work, the one thing you can count on is that the task is documented somewhere, usually on paper in a binder. I'd done PC tech support for a few years during college, but had never worked with network gear before. If my resume isn't outright false, it definitely stinks of cheese. The office is 30 minutes inside the gates of a military base. The speed limit is 30 miles per hour, and the MPs will write tickets for 1 mile over. It's a straight road. No hills or curves, only scrub pine for 30 miles. The gates are only 5 minutes from my apartment, which makes the hour and 5 drive even more infuriating. The building itself is bland in a way only 1970s era government buildings can be. A long, low building, brick walls, pierced by narrow, energy-efficient windows. My shift is Sunday through Wednesdays. 1800 until 0800 Sundays, and Mondays 200 until 0800. Tuesdays and Wednesdays. Mandatory overtime. I only work 4 days a week, but when you work nights or long shifts, you're wrecked the next day. I have no social life to speak of, excluding League of Legends. My roommates all work day shift and are usually gone to work when I get home, or out partying when I wake up. Did I mention I worked completely alone? That's not entirely true. My ship overlaps with the coworkers for an hour. In the short time Dan and I see each other, we spend the time going over activity logs and any issues he thought might crop up overnight. Other than work, Dan and I have nothing in common. He was in his 50s, with a bushy beard, thick glasses, and a penchant for plaid shirts and overalls. He worked in the Network Operations Center since he was 18 and likely would work there until he retired. Sunday nights are the hardest. After the long drive in, I badged through 4 sets of security doors into the dark cave of the NOC. Drag up a chair next to Dan, half pay attention while he mumbles over a few things, since he had been there for 12 hours and wants to leave as much as I do. Just like that, he's gone. I couldn't blame Dan for not wanting to be there. The NOC's only lit by its screens. 3 large projector displays and dozens of monitors. The room is in the middle of the building with no windows. 3 rows of low carpeted cubicles fill the room, with a bank of monitors just below the projector displays. The rest of the building is on low power overnight, which means only 1 out of every 4 banks of lights were on. The rest off or sometimes flickering and buzzing. The MPs patrol the building once a night around 0200. They can't get into my area, or at least they don't. I learned their schedule the hard way when they went into the restroom I was using one night. They laughed when I screamed, so I stayed in the stall until they left. The restrooms were, of course, at the other end of the very long hallway past dozens of dark open doors. I have considered peeing in a soda bottle instead of making that walk. The day shift people have decorated the halls with all manner of pumpkins and scarecrows and zombie heads. Earlier this week I made my way to the restroom. Only every 4th light was on in the hallway, the dim fluorescence revealing a stale institutional green. I walked past all those dark doorways, steps echoing off the hard tiles. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a life-sized, glowing green skeleton. Its eyes lit up and shouted, "Trick or treat at me!" I hate this place during Halloween. The base is located in an area that is prone to get massive thunderstorms, including tornadoes, nearly every week during autumn. A big storm hit a few nights ago. I had the Weather Channel pulled up on one of the overhead projectors with the sound off. I watched the weather alerts crawl by. In the NOC, the storm was a slight increase in the ambient noise. Something new, apart from the whirring of the ventilation system and the hum of computers. Then, at 0245, the alarm went off. Well, shit, I said. The alarm was old, an actual light on the wall with a buzzer, not part of our automated systems. I grabbed my white protocol binder, found nothing, went to my manager's desk and looked through his stack of PBs. Nothing. The UPS has a fault, my boss Mike said when I called him. Go down into the battery room and check the board. It probably caught a surge from this storm. There's a reset button on the board. Mash it, and it'll turn the alarm off. Mike was another lifer, a short man with short-cropped red hair who flew a Dixie flag on his leather jacket when he rode his Harley into work. Okay, I said. And kid, don't touch anything. I mean it. All that shit's on DC power. If you get zapped, you'll fry to jerky before anyone gets to you. Just reset it and call me when you're done. The battery room is about the size of a first-floor suburban house, filled with row upon row of what essentially are car batteries. Each battery was open on top and the cases were clear so as to show the level of acid in them. The room stank of ozone, and aside from a few dim lights down the central corridor, was pitch black. The huge copper bars connecting the row of batteries hummed in the darkness. At intervals, long wooden poles were hung from hooks on support beams. Wood is a poor conductor. The poles are used to pry off anyone unlucky enough to touch one of those copper bars. The control board was at the other end of the battery room. I walked past racks of humming batteries, my skin prickling from ambient currents in the room. Great, I said. Let's walk through 1 billion volts of electricity in the middle of a crazy thunderstorm. I had been talking to myself within weeks of starting night shift. They say that talking to yourself is an early indicator of insanity. If so, at least I'll have myself for company. Like most of the equipment in the building, I had never seen the UPS control board. As my coworker told me once during one of the overlaps, we're mushrooms. They keep us in the dark and feed us shit. Amongst multiple dials and gauges, I spotted a red reset button and pushed it. A red light on the board went out. I exhaled a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. I turned to leave. There was a wham! Clank! From the next door. Then a slowly building roar, which meant we were on generator power. I picked up the phone near the control board and called my boss. I reset the alarm, but we just switched to generator power. Yeah, that wind outside's a real bitch. We lost power about a minute ago here, Mike said. You should have plenty of fuel, enough for 5 days. Don't worry. We're essential services, so they'll get on our power sooner than that. 4 hours tops. We still gotta follow procedures, though, so I need you to go check the generator. None of that shit's automated, so go look at all the lights and check the fuel. Go in the door, turn right, and go straight back. And wear some goddamn earmuffs. I hung up the phone inside. Even with ear protection, when the generator was running, it was like standing next to a jet engine. I grabbed the earmuffs off the hook next to the door to the generator room. This sucks. I need a new job, I told myself for the 100th time that night. The generator room was lit only with dim red lights. The generators themselves were 2 tractor-trailer-sized diesel engines crammed into the room, leaving only narrow maintenance aisles on either side. The room stank of grease and poorly exhausted diesel smoke and was very hot. Sweat beaded around my hairline as I walked down the aisle. The sound covered me like a lead blanket, hammering against my chest and back, vibrating my eyeballs in their sockets. I made my way through the thickened air to the control panel at the end of the room. Fuel gauge looks good, all lights green, I said as I scribbled the readings in my notebook. Something touched my neck. I may have screamed, but it was impossible to tell in that room. I'll confess, I'm scared of spiders. Well, not so much scared as utterly revolted by. When I felt the first touch, I instantly visualized a huge black spider crawling on my neck. I flipped, did the spider dance, brushed the back of my neck a dozen times, shook my clothes, spun around in circles, nearly knocked my earmuffs loose, said a lot of bad words. After a few seconds of this, I realized there was no spider. Shit, I said, and bent to pick up my notebook. Something pushed me. I stumbled forward away from the control panel, spun around. There was nothing. What the fuck? I frantically looked around me. I was alone. Still trying to see both in front of and behind me, I stooped and grabbed my notebook. I decided that no matter what, I wasn't going to run. This was a prank, and my coworkers were watching it on video. It would probably get 1 million hits on YouTube. "It's great to be the new guy, you assholes," I shouted, even though I couldn't hear myself over the din of the generator, and I knew nobody else could either. I walked down to the tight corridor beside the generator toward the door. The whole way, I felt little pluckings at my clothes, like something pinching and pulling, but only for a second at a time. I yanked the door open, stepped through, and slammed it shut. I pulled the earmuffs off and threw them on the floor next to the control board. I was covered in sweat and my ears were ringing despite the ear protection. I wiped my face with my sleeve and started walking past racks of batteries, then stopped. Something moved down one of the side aisles. I squinted into the murk. Batteries hummed around me. My scalp prickled and itched. At the end of the aisle, a slumped, dark shape rearranged itself and slouched towards me. I staggered back, then rolled as my arm brushed against one of the battery racks. I stood still in the center of the main corridor, and the shape edged closer to me. My nose filled with a sickly sweet stench of burned pork. It reached the end of the aisle. I could see its shape. It was a man, staggering towards me. Flesh charred dark. Cables writhed across its body and trailed back into the dark. I heard the coils scrub and squeak against each other. The man had no eyes. They had burst and cooked into his cheeks. He shuffled closer. A cable wormed out of one socket, crossed the ruined bridge of his nose, and pushed itself into the other socket. For a moment, I realized I could read the print on the cable. His withered mouth gaped open, revealing teeth that had cracked and burst from heat. He stretched a stick-like, charred arm out to me, and the cables twisted upon it. I glanced down and saw cables into the floor, snaking closer to me. I ran. I don't recall badging out of the battery room, or badging through the multiple security doors to get to the NOC. I remember sitting in one position long enough that my leg went to sleep. I remember watching the doors and listening to the quiet noise of the NOC, listening for any change or perhaps for a muffled, choked scream. I heard nothing but sat very still. Mike came in early that morning. "Good job last night," he said. "I double-checked everything this morning. Looks good." He handed me my notebook. "You dropped this in the battery room." "Thanks." He looked at me, eyebrows furrowed. "You didn't see anything in there last night, did you?" I looked at him, at his orange flat top shot through with white, at the tobacco stain around the corner of his mouth, burst veins in his nose, at his eyes, pale blue and watery. "Nope."